Folks, thanks a lot for the 80,000 subscribers. You guys are awesome. But we're not stopping here. Let's push it, folks, to 100,000 subscribers. So give that support to the channel and subscribe and hit that like button down below to reach our goal of 153 likes. And now let's go for it. In the opening of the Anime, Bartender teaches us that there are two professions in the world that absolutely cannot deceive their customers: the doctor and the one who prepares your drink at a bar. So we're taken to the Shiono district in Tokyo, where a selection for a bartender is taking place at the Cardinal Hotel. Maiwa Kuroshima from the Business Strategies Division explains that this hotel opened 2 months ago and intends to include an authentic bar with a counter in its structure. The professional who passes this selection will be invited to become the bartender. The test will be conducted by Kamishima, the head of the Business Strategies Division. Kamishima asks the candidates to start by preparing their specialties, and the first contender makes a martini and serves it to the boss. However, before drinking, Kamishima remarks that the bartender doesn't know whether he has had lunch or not, and offering a strong drink to someone on an empty stomach is a problem. The candidate argues that he was only asked to prepare a drink, but the evaluator, Higuchi Yukari, eliminates him without ceremony. The second professional announces that he will make a grasshopper, so Kamishima requests it in Pousse Cafe style, which is the method of preparing the drink in layers that should not mix. Since he wasn't expecting such a difficult order, the bartender ends up taking too long and even mixes the layers, so he is also disqualified. Then the third candidate presents himself with style and charm. Kamishima asks him the idea to call this clumsy person, and Yukari, who begins taking photos of the barista non-stop, admits that it was her, because this guy is the bartender of the moment. After the selection, Higuchi complains that boss Kamishima is always so grumpy, and that all the candidates got angry with him. While Mango remembers that the hotel has already gained their reputation, but until today, nothing has been done to open this bar because hiring a bartender is proving to be a nightmare. In fact, Maiwa is already getting as grumpy as the boss from doing all these tests with him, and so she feels jealous of Yukari, who manages to keep a bit of humanity in the midst of all this chaos. Yukari responds that she is also under pressure because of this selection and believes that it will still last a long time because the boss's requirements are too vague and you value some irrelevant details for the test. For example, the hotel president stated that he is looking for a bartender capable of preparing a divine goblet, and surely the door of this bar will remain closed until they figure out what that term means. Maiwa agrees while pondering what this blessed goblet could be, until the phone of a man sleeping on the bench next to them rings and he wakes up in a hurry. But strangely, he has no idea how to answer the call. So he asks Maiwa for help, who teaches him to drag the green icon to the right. He answers and talks to a Mr. Maki while moving away. The two women find this man somewhat strange, but they see that the book he was reading was about the bars of Tokyo. And so they try to call him back to see if by any chance he was the solution to their problems, but he had already disappeared by then. Upon opening the book, they discover that it was borrowed from a library. Back at the Cardinal Hotel, boss Kamishima informs the president that all 30 candidates who participated in the process have been eliminated. In turn, the president believes that if it were easy, they would have already found the perfect bartender, but the business boss asks him to explain what this divine goblet is because the criteria seem too subjective, so the president adjusts himself in his chair to tell what the heck that is. After the meeting, Kamishima tells the girls what the divine goblet means, and Yukari asks how they are going to find it. Maiwa is fed up with this whole process because looking around, only they are stuck with the service while the other employees are moving forward with their projects normally. Because of this, boss Kamishima gives one last push to the girls and motivates them to find this bartender once and for all. Researching every bar in Tokyo, Yukari and Maiwa search for the perfect barista, trying the drinks of every place they pass by and taking the opportunity to photograph the most attractive professionals in the process. However, drinking a beer at the Ogura bar near the Sumida River, Yukari discovers that human resources won't cover the expenses of searching for the candidate, so the two will have to pay for everything they consume today out of their own pockets. Inconsolable, Maiwa leans on the counter, and the owner of Ogura asks if they are still looking for an employee for the hotel bar. Maiwa confirms and asks if he knows anyone capable of making the divine goblet, but to the surprise of both, the man affirms that he does. In this case, it's him because only a god could keep this place open until late. However, the two are not in the mood for jokes at this point and start grumbling with the bar owner, until that man from the park enters and orders a highball. Upon recognizing the women, he asks if they saw the book he left behind, and Maiwa says she doesn't have it now, but she can return it directly to the library because it's close to the office. The guy thanks her enthusiastically and says there are still good people in Japan, until this drink finally arrives. Maiwa says the highball is too weak and asks if the bartender is short on whiskey, but he argues that she's taking too long to drink it, and so the ice is already melted. Later, he reveals that the guy who just arrived is also a bartender, by chance, and Yukari sees it as a sign from destiny. The guy was thanking the colleague beside him for covering for him another day, and the colleague responds that everyone forgets their wallet once in a while. The guy agrees as he takes out his wallet from his pocket, but when he realizes he forgot to take out money to pay for his drink, the two give up interviewing this poor man for the job. The next day, the dude discovers that a young man named Sasakura won a European bartender competition, and that he currently works at the private bar Edenhall inside the Ginza building. Kamishima remembers that this bar closed, but Yukari saw in an article that said the private bar with an irregular schedule has finally reopened. Meiwa finds it strange for such a talented professional to be hidden inside a private bar, but the two agree that it's worth a visit as long as they are reimbursed for expenses. In light of this, boss Kamishima grumbles, but hands over some cash to the duo. As dusk settles in, they manage to reach Ginza building, reminiscing how they often walked down this street but never heard of this Edenhall bar. Stepping through the door, they encounter two men drinking in an extremely calm and pleasant atmosphere. One of the men alerts Sasakura that two customers have arrived, and then the bartender emerges, revealing himself to be the park guy. This time, Sasakura behaves in a completely different manner from what they're accustomed to, displaying formality and elegance. As Miwa observes the neatly organized bottles behind the counter, she acknowledges the impressive collection the guy has until he reappears and asks if it was Ogura who referred them to Edenhall. Yukari mentions finding great reviews of the bar online, praising an excellent bartender. Sasakura is pleased with what people are saying about him on social media, but Maiwa wonders if he's really all that. Suddenly, one of the customers orders a grasshopper a La Pousse Cafe style, and since this drink eliminated yesterday's second candidate due to its difficulty, the girls pay close attention to what unfolds. Calmly, Sasakura meticulously layers each component of the grasshopper, then presents the flawless work to Edenhall's customer. Yukari times 30 seconds for the preparation on her stopwatch, unlike the eliminated candidate's 1 minute and a half. To revamp yesterday's test, she then orders a martini, but with her stomach growling, Sasakura realizes she's on an empty stomach and suggests a lower alcohol beverage. Yukari tells Miwa he passed that test, then eagerly requests a light, shaken, pink-colored drink. Without hesitation, Sasakura understands the request and adds all the ingredients to the shaker. As he starts shaking, Yukari swoons over the way he uses his fingers to mix the drink, and in no time he has prepared a cosmopolitan for her. With the first sip, Yukari reacts as if she's tasted the elixir of the gods, yet Maiwa remains skeptical. For this reason, when the bartender asks if she's decided on her drink, Miwa asks him to prepare a drink he thinks suits her best, even though he knows nothing about her life, intending to put the pressure on him and see how he fares. Unfazed by the challenge, Sasakura complies and carves 2 ice cubes like sculptures, delicately placing them in the glass and removing the residual water from the bottom after checking the ice's consistency. Then he starts the drink with a base of whiskey, leading Miwa to consider the most obvious options like a Manhattan or a Godfather or perhaps a Highland cooler due to the Scotch whiskey. However, Sasakura surprises her by adding just a club soda to the mix, thus preparing an authentic highball for his customer. Miwa thinks it's too simple a drink to be compared with her, and that anyone could make a drink of this difficulty, so she prepares to take the first sip, already certain she'll have to restart the search for the hotel's first bartender. However, upon tasting the liquid, Miwa is transported to the clouds and achieves spiritual peace, experiencing the gentle and smooth flavor of this masterpiece. She then asks how a highball could taste so good, and Sasakura reiterates his earlier thought from the beginning of the episode, where he says that the only 2 professions that can't deceive their customer are those of a doctor and a bartender, because the slightest change in the formula is the difference between serving the cure or the poison. In this case, Sasakura noticed that Maiwa is very tired and so busy that she can barely focus on anything other than work, because the button on her sleeve is too loose and she didn't even notice since earlier that her watch is upside down. Therefore, for a stressed body, a traditional highball would be too heavy, so he reduced the alcohol content. To maintain the flavor everyone's accustomed to in this drink, Sasakura used specially firm ice to balance the beverage, because if you keep the ice in the freezer for a long period, sculpt its core, and let it rest in the freezer, it becomes denser and harder to melt. Maiwa questions if he considered all these details to prepare a single drink, so he explains the meaning of the word bartender. Bar is a perch where birds can rest, and tender means gentle and friendly. In other words, the bartender is a cozy perch, where comfort is cultivated. Faced with this work philosophy, Maiwa begins to feel silly for testing this professional in that way, but he humbly responds that his job is to prepare drinks tailored to each customer. So the next day, Meiwa and Yukari are determined that Ryu Sasakura is the right name to finally open the bar at the Hotel Cardinal. convinced that the president will approve of this idea. Chief Kimishima reads that he was working at Hotel Latz in Paris, which is why he wasn't chosen for selection earlier. Yukari bets that this bartender is capable of preparing the divine cup, but Miwa and Kimishima are intrigued by why he left Japan. Still, the business chief asks the two to convince the president of the choice and prepare a good proposal for the bartender. Excited about resolving this long-standing case, the two hurry to finish the work, but Miwa realizes she's missed the deadline to return the book to the library. Meanwhile, in the outskirts of Tokyo, Ryusa Sakura gazes steadily at an empty plot of land with a strange expression. Returning to the exit of the bar last night, Miwa is sure that he's the right guy, while Yukari questions how they're going to convince him to work at the Hotel Cardinal. According to Miwa, for some international guests who only arrive at the hotel late at night, the bartender is the first person they can talk to, and a single gesture from the server can determine the first impression of people from that country, meaning it's not a challenge for just anyone. Still, the two are motivated to convince Sasaki, but upon arriving at the door of Eden Hall, the bar was closed for personal reasons. At that moment, the bartender was working in a bar called Le Pin, where another more experienced employee thanks Sasakura for covering the shift and apologizes for calling him at the last minute. Upon realizing that today is the 22nd, the man remembers something important, until suddenly the owner of the Hotel Cardinal arrives at the bar. Sasakura hands a towel to the customer, making the old man realize he's a new face, so the other employee explains that he's helping out because the bartender of the house is sick. Sasakura introduces himself to the customer and asks what he would like, so the gentleman orders a cocktail that the bartender thinks he will like. Soon Sasakura serves a gin and tonic with added bitters, as it's hot outside. However, the customer says it's awful, so Sasakura apologizes and suggests a daiquiri. But once again, the old man doesn't like the drink. Then he prepares a Bellini, and the old man hates it. Finally, he says that all the drinks are terrible, and then he answers a phone call. With the unbearable elderly man gone, Sasakura's colleague apologizes for the behavior of that man and explains that when the deceased owner of this place was still studying in Yokohama, this gentleman used to be his client. He always comes to this bar on the day of the owner's death and treats everyone like this. Meanwhile, the girls wonder where Sasakura might be, and Miwa sees on a specialized website that when the bar closes for personal reasons, the bartender usually goes out to help in other places. There are 300 bars in Ginza, and the night is just beginning, so the duo sets off to hunt. In the meantime, the gentleman returns to Sasaki and asks what he will prepare now, so the bartender serves a classic martini. The gentleman notices a different aroma, and Sasakura explains that it was made in the Dutch style. Generally, this drink is made with London gin distilled in a column still, but the professional opted for a Dutch gin, aged for 12 years in the old-fashioned way. With that, the gentleman thought the bartender was calling him old and says that Sasaki has the creativity of a child. Furthermore, he teaches that this gin is best served neat and chilled. Without losing his composure, Sasaki comments that the customer really knows a lot about the subject, but he continues grumbling that if the owner were still alive, he wouldn't be forced to drink this crap. At least he admits that Sasakura made an effort, but then he hands a bill to the bartender and tells him to bring sake from the corner vending machine, disregarding the employee's drinks. Later, Sasakura goes to drown his sorrows at Bar Ogura and ends up revealing how terrible his day was. The owner thinks he was talking about the drink, but Sasakura explains the situation and asks how he reacts when a customer says the drink is terrible. Before the attendant could answer, Meiwa and Yukari finally find out where the bartender got himself into, and the owner of the place is offended by the term the woman used. Sasakura explains that he was covering for a sick employee, so Miwa decides to get straight to the point after handing her card to the guy, inviting him to work at the Hotel Cardinal. The owner of Ogura asks if this was the man capable of preparing the divine cup, but anyway, Sasakura refuses the offer for having just started at Eden Hall. Miwa assures that she can raise the salary and benefits as Sasakura wishes, but still Sasakura has no idea what to say, so he asks the boss to lower it once more. On the next night, before officially opening Eden Hall, Sasakura remembered what that bartender said about the deceased owner of Le Pin Bar, so when Yukari and Miwa come to question the young man about the offer, he had closed Eden Hall again. At that moment, he was receiving the gentleman again at Le Pin after personally asking Mrs. Maki, the owner, to invite him back to the establishment. The old man asks what horrible drinks he should expect tonight, but before anything else, Sasaki begins to tell an old story that takes place after the war in the city of Yokohama. With the reopening of the ports, Japan's bars began to import Western drinks that were previously only available in fancy hotels, with their vibrant colors and complex, refined aromas. At that moment, Sasakura serves a drink called Old Pal to the classic regular of the house, whose name means an old friend. Then, the bartender mentions that the gentleman always visits this bar on the 22nd, the day of the owner's death, and that this is a way to reunite with the old comrade. With this speech, the customer still thinks all this nonsense won't make the drink any better, but upon tasting the drink, he realizes it's the same flavor as the cocktails from the Le Pin's owner. At that time, refrigerators and ice were rare, and it wasn't a simple job to chill a drink, so a slightly colder drink was already synonymous with refreshment in those days. According to the gentleman, this old pal reminded him of the old times at Le Pin, and Sasaki mentions a teaching from his former mentor about never altering the taste of drinks. That way, the gentleman could reunite with his past self, and Sasaki is sure that even with the passage of time, the bar owner served the drink exactly the same way, exclusively for his dear friend, and this represents to the gentleman the memory of an irreplaceable person. After all, time always passes, but the memories of these flavors will never fade away. Out of respect for his friend, the old man never drank cocktails anywhere else and also didn't like it when he tried. However, he feels that Sasakura was exactly who he was looking for, so from now on he considers him his new friend, and as he leaves, he makes it clear that he can help Sasakura with whatever he needs. Heading home, the bartender stirred memories in the Le Pin regular of days spent with his late wife. Meanwhile, Sasaki noticed the business card left on the counter by Teizo Kuroshima, CEO of Hotel Cardinal. The surname sparked a flicker of recognition. At the same time, the hotel girls hunted down the guy like crazed hounds. The next day, Yukari delivered the news that Ryu Sasakura had declined their offer, but Maiwa pointed out that he hadn't officially responded yet. She vowed to bring the professional in to open the Hotel Cardinal bar. As night fell, they pursued him again, insisting that a no wasn't an acceptable answer and asking what they could do to persuade him. Despite their efforts, Sasakura seemed only to grow more uncomfortable with this unwanted persistence. Meanwhile, the rain outside intensified, drawing a drenched woman into the comfort of the Eden Hall. Without preamble, she ordered a special drink for someone who had just escaped a downpour, and Sasakura accepted the challenge as always. When asked about her preferences to inspire his concoction, she replied that she loved to get more drunk, but the smell of alcohol was already turning her stomach. Therefore, if he couldn't entertain her with a weak drink, then something stronger would suffice. Sasakura listened attentively to every word and got to work, while the woman grumbled about how people in this world were truly rotten. She used the bartender himself as an example to prove her point, noting his forced smile and suggesting that he was probably thinking about how unpleasant this annoying customer was. She acknowledged that not everyone could tolerate her blunt manner of speaking, but in the bartender's case, he was obliged to listen to every word that came out of her mouth. Noticing the bartender's distracted state, she questioned if he was even paying attention, and Sasakura explained that he was contemplating what cocktail she might enjoy. With a touch of humor, she remarked that he was indeed a hypocrite, to which he retorted that he preferred being rotten. Ultimately, he revealed that he knew what drink to make but warned that it might take a while to prepare. As the bartender left, Yukari found it curious that he left the bar unattended with customers, while Miwa was intrigued to know what he would give someone who wanted to get drunk without drinking anything strong. Sometime later, Sasakura returned with a borrowed pot and lit the stove. After finishing the preparation, he served the bullshot drink, believing it to be the ideal choice for the woman despite her certainty that it was soup. After tasting it, she immediately felt her shoulders relax, prompting her to inquire if the drink actually contained alcohol. Sasakura revealed that it was, in fact, a beef broth with vodka, invented by the owner of an American meat house in the 1950s. The soup warmed the woman from the inside, revitalizing her. More relaxed now, she recounted attending 3 terrible parties that night, feeling terrible at each one and inadvertently taking it out on the bartender. In response, Sasakura explained the meaning of the term nightcap as a final round of drinks before a reluctant farewell, considering that part of adult life involved deceiving and lying to oneself, and not every day ended well. Thus, with this nightcap, perhaps the woman was bidding farewell to the bad part of herself that had been terrible up until now. With that, the woman wondered if it would be against the rules to request a second nightcap, so Sasakura recommended adding lemon and tomato juice to transform the bull shot into a bloody bowl. At the end of the night, the woman bid farewell and apologized for the trouble she had caused the bartender, but he emphasized that it was a pleasure to help her in this difficult moment of her life. As she was leaving, the man added that this was another way to look at things which applied to both her and the clients she worked with. With that said, Maiwa asked about her profession, and Sasakura had noticed that she used the favorite bag of a certain American Secretary of State, hence it was known as the Dulles bag. Being durable and able to hold many documents, it was also commonly used by lawyers. In the face of yet another demonstration of impeccable service, Maiwa insisted once again on having the bartender at the Cardinal, making it clear that she wouldn't give up until he signed the contract papers. Seeing that the two wouldn't leave him alone, Sasakura commented that there was no other way, and as they leaned over the counter to listen, the bartender confessed that he had a terrible fear of heights and therefore preferred to stay grounded on the Eden Hall's ground floor. Researching the next day during office hours, they discovered that the hotel where he had worked in Paris was in an extremely high penthouse, so they wondered why he would lie to them like that. At that moment, even President Kuroshima called and announced that he wanted Ryu Sasakura at the hotel bar, so they realized they had no option but to proceed. Meanwhile, the lawyer from yesterday asked Secretary Yajima about today's schedule, which included an inventory, a custody hearing, and 2 divorces. The woman was infuriated by how everyone only thought of themselves all the time, but also remembered that they needed her help trying to see the situation from another perspective. So she asked if Yajima had heard of a bull shot. He asked if she meant the cocktail or the suspense novel, which was about a lawyer who posed as tough and called everyone despicable, but secretly had a kind heart. With that, the woman laughed and invited her friend to have one after work at a nice bar she knew, despite the bartender being quite despicable. However, despite the undeniable talent of the young bartender, Yukari tells Miwa that she overheard a conversation between their manager, Kimishima, and the head bartender, Nishizawa. In this conversation, the manager decides to find another candidate as a backup because if Sasakura doesn't want to work at the Cardinal, they'll be left with no option. Meanwhile, Nishizawa believes that the hotel president is obsessed with offering the best service to compete with Bar K at the Diamond Star Hotel, which caters to the high echelons of the financial market. They reached this level thanks to the work of their bartender, Ryuichi Kuzuhara, who even earned the nickname Mr. Perfect. After telling the story, Inukami notices that Maiwa had been ready to leave for quite some time despite being known for her workaholic tendencies, so her friend considers that maybe she has found a boyfriend. In reality, Meiwa had left earlier to attend the bartender Ryuichi Kuzuhara's award ceremony at the Diamond Star Hotel. She had never seen a bartender receive a medal before, so this Kuzuhara guy must be really incredible. Behind her, Kuroshima emphasizes that he's the one who elevated Japanese mixology to a worldwide level, hence earning the nickname Mr. Perfect. After recounting this story to her granddaughter, the president of the Cardinal Hotel personally talks to the celebrated bartender. Kuzuhara feels honored to be in front of the favorite client of the late Lapin owner, but the president asserts that he has been quite impressed with the bartender at the Eden Hall, who, despite not being as experienced, possesses incredible talent. Later, after the event, Meiwa and Kuroshima go to Sasakura's bar and ask for a drink to relieve their stiff necks because they came from an unbearable party and were so stressed. Sasakura already had in mind what he was going to prepare until a woman arrives at the Eden Hall asking if it's still time to order something. Sasakura assures her that the night has only just begun, so she sits down and orders a B&B, a cocktail with equal parts brandy and Benedictine. According to Sasakura, the best way to enjoy this drink is at the end of the night, just before going to bed, because it combines the rich flavor of brandy with the unique sweetness of Benedictine. Since the alcohol content is intense, it usually helps the drinker fall asleep. After preparing and serving the drink, Sasakura engages with the customer, tasting the cocktail and asking if he has been working in this area for a long time. The woman is surprised when Sasakura replies that he has been doing this for 8 years. Maiwa tries to understand the customer's intention with this question, although Kuroshima knows exactly what it's about. Then, after having the drink, the woman becomes slightly emotional and states that today she finally gathered the courage to quit her job before leaving. Sasakura observed that, unlike regular customers, she was concerned about the opening hours and was fascinated by the bartender's spoon technique, so he wonders why she would leave mixology. Faced with this deduction, the Cardinals president feels even more confident that this is the ideal professional to open the hotel bar, but Sasakura reaffirms that he unfortunately declined the offer because of his fear of heights. Maiwa was going to mention that he worked on the rooftop of another hotel in Paris, but before that, a special customer just entered through the door. This time it was Ryuichi Kuzuhara himself, whom Kuroshima was sure would show up. As he sits down, Kuzuhara orders a gin fizz, and while the bartender prepares it, the awarded professional wonders who invented this popular cocktail. Sasakura explains that the drink originated in 1888 in the city of New Orleans by a bartender named Ramos who worked at the Imperial Cabinet Saloon. The name of the drink, fizz, comes from the sound of the bubbles in the carbonated water, although Sasakura doesn't think that sound has much to do with the name of the drink. Kuroshima asks if this is something to tell Mr. Perfect, while Miwa concludes that Sasakura must not know this awarded bartender because he was trained in France. Next, the young bartender serves the gin fizz to his customer, who, upon taking the first sip, makes a strange expression. Sasakura asks if the drink isn't pleasing, but Kuzuhara just wants to know what subtle flavor this is, like an aged rum. Sasakura explains that he developed his own recipe because he thought the standard drink would be somewhat ordinary for a top-notch professional like Kuzuhara. Kuzuhara questions how Sasakura knew that, so the young man explains his deduction with two main points. First, the gin fizz is widely used by professionals to test a bartender's work. To explain to Maiwa the reason, Kuroshima wets his finger in his drink to draw the kanji for eternity, because this symbol contains all the basic strokes of shono, Japanese calligraphy. Similarly, the mixing and dosing technique make the gin fizz a drink that brings together all the essential techniques of a bartender. As for the second reason, Sasakura explains that Mr. Perfect's pinky finger seems to have a typical callus from years and years of mixing. Finally, the young bartender believes that Kuzuhara is used to evaluating and drinking drinks only for work, so he would like him to appreciate the experience as a customer on the other side of the counter. Kuzuhara asks if the boy thinks he's amusing him with his guessing game as well as putting this rum in his drink. Sasakura corrects the man by explaining that he only added wasanbang sugar, the same used in common sweets, because it is known for its subtle sweetness. That said, the Cardinals president comments that Sasakura tied a tactical knot on Mr. Perfect, so the experienced bartender heads to the exit, tired of all the professionals who have tried to impress him with exotic drinks. Finally, he says that Sasakura's cocktail is still far from perfection. After the departure of the awarded barista, Kuroshima emphasizes that he doesn't usually get worked up about nonsense like that, and then asks the house bartender to make a gin fizz just like the previous one, with wasanbang sugar, a drink that Maiwa takes the opportunity to order as well. The next day, Maiwa mentions that she went out with her grandfather, and that he is like a father to her, since her real parents died when she was very young. In the middle of the conversation, Kimishima asks for less gossip and more work, so Miwa looks back at a newspaper article on the computer that talked about Ryuichi Kuzuhara, and Miwa remembers how rude he was to Sasakura. Cutting off her friend's train of thought, Yukari asks if she's seeing someone, so the manager scolds the duo again. Meanwhile, Sasakura was heading to buy some liqueurs at a store when he spotted that customer from yesterday consulting with a fortune teller. The fortune teller revealed that the woman didn't seem satisfied with her current job. Approaching the girl after this consultation, Sasakura expressed his happiness that she hadn't completely abandoned bartending yet. So the two ended up sitting together at a cafe to chat. Once there, she talked about her work at Bar Manami, where she recently prepared her first B&B for a customer. However, he only said it could be improved, while her boss emphasized the need for better blending. Since then, the girl trained every single day to move quickly enough not to melt the ice, which resulted in blisters on her fingers. When she asked how she could improve, Sasakura replied that when mixing, the bartender envisions the imagined version of what the drink could become. Therefore, mixing is not just a mechanical gesture, but also requires imagination to be done best. The B&B itself, for example, seems simple, but it has this catch that every bartender falls into. However, when a bartender makes this mistake and gets so discouraged to the point of wanting to quit the industry, maybe that person should change professions. The woman asks who he thinks he is to say such a thing, so Sasakura suggests she take that frustration and make a better cocktail. Irritated, the woman stands up and introduces herself as Kyoko Kawakami, a bartender at Bar Manami, and invites her colleague to visit her anytime. As night falls, Sasakura receives an unexpected invitation, and taking advantage of the heavy rain that drove away the clientele, he closes Eden Hall and heads to Hotel Diamond Star, where Bar K is located. Inside, an attendant named Chen welcomes the young man in the presence of Kuroshima and Kuzuhara. With everyone's arrival, the Cardinals president asks the two professionals to prepare the same cocktail. Chen states that they don't take such requests, but the perfect gentleman instructs him to close the bar. Before that happens, Miwa also arrives at her grandfather's request, who wants to see his granddaughter enjoying the drinks of the evening, so he asks her what she would like. Miwa looks around and orders a Manhattan after noticing her red purse. According to her grandfather, this drink is the queen of cocktails, just as the martini is the king. After the order, Kuzuhara makes a condition. If his Manhattan is tastier, he would like the president to drink one of his cocktails out of honor. If he loses, he'll take off his uniform and retire on the spot. With the conditions set, the competition begins, and Kuzuhara asks Sasakura what the most important factor in making a cocktail is. Sasakura replies that it's balance, something his competitor agrees with, but adds that it's not just a matter of addition, but also multiplication. When the spoon's back touches the inside of the mixing glass and spins in the same direction as the ice, if you mix too much, the ice melts and the drink becomes watery. But if you don't mix enough, the drink seems incomplete. Seeing that the gentlemen are almost finished, Kuroshima asks his granddaughter to close her eyes, and when she opens them, the two cocktails are served in front of her. Since she doesn't know who prepared which, she tastes the thinner glass first and loves it because despite the whiskey base, the flavor is light and refreshing. Then she tries the second one and likes it more because it's richer and more flavorful. Her grandfather informs her that this is Sasakura's Manhattan, and she wants to know why they're different. Sasakura explains that for the human tongue, drinks that are 30 degrees above or below body temperature seem tastier, and apparently, his cocktail was 1 or 2 degrees warmer than the competitors. When he saw Maiwa hurriedly arrive at the bar, Sasakura knew her body temperature had risen. For this reason, he made sure the drink wasn't too cold for her. That said, the perfect gentleman comments that the competitor's inexperience is quite charming, as cocktails are luxury items and should be tailored to the customer. However, he asks Maiwa to try Sasakura's drink again and wonder if it's really a Manhattan. When she takes another sip, the drink's flavor had changed, so Sasakura drinks the other glass and has to admit that the flavor remained the same. It was then that Kusakura showed Liv what the perfect drink is, and that if Sasakura worried less about pleasing customers, maybe he would be at a higher level. Finally, he tells the competitor to leave as he is clearly not up to par. As Sasakura leaves, Maiwa follows and the perfect gentleman asks if he will be the bartender at Cardinal's bar, but the old man no longer knows what to think. After the competition, it's time for the experienced bartender to claim his reward, so he asks Kuroshima what he would like. Meanwhile, Maiwa was trying to convince Sasakura that he can win next time, but he responds curtly that she is an amateur and doesn't understand any of this. Maiwa gets annoyed by the rudeness and points out that she's only concerned about him, so the two go together to Bar Ogura. Once there, Sasakura explains that the perfect gentleman not only mixes the ingredients, it's as if he transforms them into a new substance, and that's why the flavor didn't change over time and Sasakura got beaten. In turn, Maiwa disagrees that it was a beating because anyone can improve their technique with dedication, but few truly care about pleasing the customer. Maiwa got a drink made especially for her, so she thinks Sasakura won in her opinion. That said, Sasakura thanks her and confesses that he always found her very nice, so she slaps his drink in embarrassment at this unexpected compliment. The next day, Kuroshima tells Kamishima that the French chef at the hotel had to return home to care for his sick relative, so they'll need a replacement, and it must be the most sought-after chef in Paris, Yamanouchi. However, unfortunately, he has a list of peculiar demands, like all the ingredients he uses must be identical to the ones he uses in Paris, for example. Since complying with such a demand would destroy the restaurant's profit margin, Kuroshima wants the head of the business division to negotiate a compromise with this chef. Kuroshima doesn't care if Kamishima has to pray to God or to the divine goblet. He wants that chef at the hotel. Later, at Eden Hall, Kamishima orders a Moscow mule from Sasakura on his first visit there, and after tasting it, he understood why his colleagues insisted so much for him to visit that bar. Sasakura presumes that one of these colleagues might be Miwa because the customer sits in an exemplary manner, suggesting they work at the hotel. Kamishima is impressed by the young man's intuition, and soon remarks that he had no idea what that divine goblet meant, but after tasting the drink, not only did he love the flavor, but he also feels more fulfilled to face the day. And it's because of this talent that the business chief pleads for the bartender to use his cocktails to help with the problem he's having. Closing up Eden Hall, Sasakura stops by Ogura's to relax a bit because he's not the type of guy who enjoys being in the spotlight or rushing around. Venting to Mr. Ogura, he orders a portion of gyoza and notices there was an extra ingredient in it. So he chews it carefully, but he's mistaken to think it's miso. In fact, Ogura had added honey to give it that different flavor. According to Ogura, when you set aside prejudices, it opens up a range of options that can turn into great flavors, and this observation stuck with Sasakura. The next day, Kamishima tells the girls that he went to Eden Hall alone, and they immediately ask if Sasakura agreed to work at the hotel. However, he informs them that it was actually under orders from the president to try to recruit Yamanouchi. Miwa is impressed by the fact that the hotel was trying to bring in a 3-star chef, so Kamishima informs them that the three of them will try to close the deal with this renowned chef over the weekend. As planned, they soon receive Yamanouchi at the airport and take him to various places in the city. In the evening, at one of the exquisite restaurants they visited, the chef tells Kamishima that he didn't ask to bring ingredients from France because he loves the country, but because he works with products that only function if they are from a certain brand or produced in a certain way. Kamishima understands but responds that it might be a bit excessive to request water and vegetables imported from France. Hearing this, the chef gives up on any negotiations, but the 3 Cardinal employees end up convincing him to visit Eden Hall, the last stop of the night. Upon arrival, Yamanouchi informs the bartender that he's only there out of obligation, so Sasakura plays his trump card right away, which is always an extraordinary drink. Kamishima asks the chef to figure out what this drink is made of, and if he can, nobody will pressure him anymore. Otherwise, he'll have to consider the proposal. However, Yamanouchi trusts in his skill as a French culinary chef and is sure he'll get it right, so he takes a glass of the drink and notes that it's amber in color, closer to tea than wine. It seems like a tone of vintage port wine, with low alcohol content, and the smell resembles Japanese miso. Next, he finally tastes the cocktail and presumes through the flavor that it's made from a brand of Oloroso wine, aged for about 20 years. With that said, the bartender pulls the real drink used in the cocktail from the counter, leaving everyone speechless. It's actually true mirin, the kind used for cooking, but aged for 10 years. The sweet taste comes from the glutinous rice and koji fungus the drink contains. Soon he serves more glasses to the others present, and everyone agrees it tastes like a different drink. Until Yamanouchi stands up and complains that it wasn't a fair challenge, and he would never work with people who tried to deceive him. However, before the chef leaves, Sasakura comments that he is indeed a top professional because he certainly thought it was Oloroso because of the koji fungus. Then the bartender tells the story of a similar competition that took place in Tokyo, and one of the participants assumed that a drink from Northern Europe was umeshu, a plum liquor. Since the event was held in Japan, the man let his prejudices define his assumption. But over time, he got rid of those constraints until he became the greatest sommelier in the world. With that said, Sasakura believes that Yamanouchi might have prejudice against ingredients that didn't come from France or fear being criticized if the taste doesn't come out the same, even using the same method. Sasakura recounts that he himself has suffered prejudice for being where he's from because people thought a Japanese wouldn't understand Western flavors, so he wouldn't know how to make the drinks. Therefore, Kamishima didn't choose this deceptive drink for no reason. He wanted to teach Yamanouchi not to succumb to prejudices. The chef asks Kamishima if he really thought about that, so Sasakura eggs him on to maintain the narrative, which he does. Thus, the cook finally agrees to hear a proposal from the Cardinal Hotel. The next day, Kamishima tells the story to the president and wonders how such a young bartender can be so attentive and talented. In turn, since the business chief thinks that way, Kuroshima asks him to drag that kid to the Cardinal too. Later, at Eden Hall, Meiwa finds it amusing that her boss pretends to understand anything about mirin, and Sasakura adds that bartenders are like mirin, the secret ingredient of the recipe, while customers are the main dish, those who make the bar what it is. Suddenly, Kyoko Kawakami appears at Eden Hall, the girl who had quit her job. Then she reveals that she actually decided to stay at work because she got scolded by Sasakura and ended up giving in. Since that day, she has worked so hard that the owners let her prepare the cocktails, but one day, a manager tasted the martini she made and said it had no face. The problem is that Kyoko has no idea what it means for a drink to have face. Without saying a word, Sasakura asks what she'll have, and she orders a beefier gin, Noile vermouth, in a 3-to-1 ratio, because that would be a martini with character. As he prepares the drink, Sasakura points out that it's quite simple to make yet considered the king of drinks because the combinations are endless, and depending on who makes it, the mixture of gin and vermouth in this drink can take on various expressions, making the martini so sought after. Speaking of which, Hyoko notices a different fragrance in her drink, and upon tasting it, realizes it's completely different from how she makes it. Sasakura believes that perhaps she isn't bringing out the personality of the beefeater, which if diluted loses its essence, but if you mix it without melting the ice, it emits a citrus fragrance. As Kyoko comments that her boss, Minami, never taught her that, Sasakura questions why she chose beefeater as the gin for the mix. The one explains that's how her boss does it, so Sasakura understands why he said her martini had no character. It's because she hadn't added a touch of personality to the cocktail. Finally, he agrees with Minami because certain lessons can't be incorporated with words alone. Sometimes it's only through the blood and sweat of trial that we can truly excel at something or bring our personality to our work. Thus, he reiterates that perhaps it's better for Kyoko to enjoy the drinks from where she is, on the other side of the counter. Kyoko gets nervous once again because, according to her, it's very rude of the bartender to make such a comment again. Serene as always, Sasakura invites the girl to drown her sorrows in a great martini nearby. The bartender takes the woman and Miwa to Hell's Arms, a bar he frequented when he was an apprentice. Upon arrival, vinyl records and record players give a personal touch to the place besides the bartender being a woman, which is rare. The three sit down and Sasakura asks where Uehara is, but the bartender informs them that the boss took the night off. Soon, the three order a martini each and Miwa is confused by the woman using vodka in the cocktail mix, just like Kyoko. When Kyoko tastes it, she thought it would have a sharper taste than a gin martini, but it goes down smoother even with the stronger flavor. Miwa notices that the lemon peel sinks into the glass, making it easier to drink. So she asks the bartender how she did that, but the woman replies that it's a professional secret. However, Sasakura remembers when Uehara came up with the trick of cutting part of the peel to sink it, teaching that a true bartender sees what no one else does beyond raw and naked vision. The attendant is intrigued by the man knowing the bar owner, so she asks for his name. As the conversation goes on, she finds out that he and Kyoko are colleagues, so she introduces herself as Yuri Ginjo and says this is her 3rd year in the profession, which frustrates Kyoko, who has the same time in mixology and still can't make such a drink. To discover the face of Ginjo's martini, Kyoko orders a gin martini and finds out that she keeps the gin at -5 degrees, almost freezing. The vermouth is martini extra dry, and then she mixes more than usual to raise the temperature, enhancing the flavor and aroma, while the chilled gin replaces the ice to keep the drink cold. Maiwa asks if Ginjo isn't afraid to share her technique, but the bartender affirms that 2 different people can achieve the same taste even using the same technique, so this will always be her signature. Kyoko tries it and notes that the drink is strong, but she can really feel the aroma and personality of the gin. With that, she understands that what defines the face of the drink is the bartender, and since she doesn't know what kind of bartender she is, her drinks lack personality. On the other hand, Sasakura says that it really takes time for us to know what kind of professionals we want to be, while Ginjo emphasizes that she even participated in a contest that reinvents famous drinks to find out who she was, and it wasn't an easy journey. That said, the bartender is called by a customer, while Kyoko keeps pondering this question in her head. The next day, Ginjo tells Uehara that Sasakura dropped by Hell's Arm, and the bar owner says he's the guy from the Divine Cup. Since he met him when he was younger, Sasakura has always made it clear that he wanted to alleviate the customer's worries with a single drink, being someone capable of preparing the Divine Cup. Uehara recalls that the boy said this with fire in his eyes, but Ginjo thinks maybe that flame has been extinguished, surprising the boss. Meanwhile, at Bar K at the Diamond Star Hotel, Kuzuhara makes a difficult request to Kurashima, but the Cardinal President says he has something in mind to solve this problem. A few days later, Sasakura and Miwa found themselves in the sweltering heat of July in Japan, waiting for the train to arrive at the station for a joint experience. Soon, Kyoko and Yuri Ginjo joined the group after accepting the invitation to visit every bartender's paradise, the famous Yamazaki Distillery. This place is always packed with tourists. Sasakura pulled some strings to secure a reservation. Being friends with someone influential like Mr. Kurashima has its perks, and the CDO of Cardinal believes this experience could be enriching for the professionals, so he insisted on footing the bill for the young ones, even though not everyone was thrilled about it. In addition to the 3 girls, Sasakura made sure to be accompanied by another fellow professional, who, upon arriving at the station, immediately caught Kyoko's passionate gaze. Just before everyone boarded the train, Kyoko tried to strike up a conversation with the man in every way possible, managing to glean the information that his name is Kelvin Chen. An employee of Bar K, Yuri, also introduced herself, but Kyoko was determined to grab Kelvin's attention, despite his dry responses to her questions showing little interest in her. When she asked if he was excited to visit the distillery, he responded that Mr. Kurashima forced him to go, making the atmosphere even more tense. After the journey, the group arrived at the Yamazaki Distillery, Japan's oldest whiskey distillery, operational since 1923. Sasakura challenged the companions to guess why the distillery was located precisely there, and according to Kelvin, it was built around 3 rivers to take advantage of the mild temperature and humid climate, as these are the ideal conditions for whiskey aging. Sasakura remarked that his friend had indeed studied to isolate himself, to which Kelvin responded unenthusiastically that he needed to live up to the name of the exquisite Bar K. Upon arrival at the distillery, a guide announced the start of the educational tour, explaining that the main ingredient in malt whiskey is barley, which when mixed with water forms the mash. Upon fermenting the mash, yeast is added, thus distilling the raw liquid known as low wine. Miwa noticed that this low wine is a transparent whiskey, so Sasakura explained that the color comes with aging, taking 5 to 10 years before the whiskey's flavor can be appreciated. Speaking of which, Miwa noticed a barrel dated 1924, sparking her curiosity about the taste. Kelvin remarked that the contents must have completely evaporated by now, and Kyoko retorted that everyone already knew that, being rather harsh with him. As the girls explored the distillery, Sasakura noticed Kelvin isolated in his own corner. Later, everyone except Kelvin participated in the whiskey malt tasting, and the custom was to ask the guests to prepare their own highballs. But since there were only professionals at the table, the guide suggested that each prepare their desired drink. Kelvin Chen took the honors at Sasakura's request, delicately preparing the ice with the spoon and pouring the whiskey into the glass. Using a trick or two, he finished a highball by adding a carbonated beverage, prompting Miwa to complain that the guide didn't share any techniques with the rest of the group, which even embarrassed the guide because that was the purpose of the activity. To change the subject, Sasakura invited everyone to taste the low wine, and everyone enjoyed the taste, which is quite different from the final product after aging. However, just as he didn't drink the malts, Kelvin refused to try it, stating that he would never serve that to his clients. However, with some insistence from his colleagues, he ended up taking a sip, but ultimately found the taste unpleasant. Despite this, Sasakura found it worthwhile to know the taste of each product involved in the production of what is served to the customer, even if it is unpleasant. Nevertheless, Kelvin considered it all a waste of time and remained unmoved by his colleague's opinion. In the late afternoon, Kyoko announced that she would participate in a competition called the Cocktail Prize. According to Yuri, after everyone visited Hell's Arms together, Kyoko went back alone to talk about participating in this event, so the two decided to visit several different bars to study cocktails. Changing the subject, as Kelvin said he had things to attend to and ended up going back to the hotel earlier than the others, Kyoko commented that the man had been annoying and unfriendly the whole time, full of arrogance just because he was a disciple of Mr. Perfect. Miwa took the opportunity to mention that he was like that even with his customers, which must discourage people from returning to the bar because of the terrible treatment. Sasakura invited the guy to interact with the other bartenders, but since it wasn't possible, at least he hopes that Kelvin can learn something interesting on this trip. Speaking of the devil, before returning to the hotel, Kelvin Chen passed by the old Takiya property, which had been vacant for a long time, and he just found out about it. From what was said, someone bought the house and kept it the way it was. Looking at a personal item he kept for this trip, Kelvin recalls Chito's questioning if they're really going to do this. A day later, at the Minas Shrine, Sasakura is exhausted after touring the local bars all night. First he went to K6, then to Calvador, Giunsembo, Kiyomachi Sembo, El Tesoro, Talisker, Finlandia, and finally to the Rocking Chair Bar. Meiwa finds amusement in her friend's unusual adventure and then asks Kelvin how his night was. The man remained too distracted on the ride and seemed not to have understood, so Sasakura invited him to see the famous Nadamiya water source, mentioned even in the oldest collection of Japanese poems, the Manyoshu. It is said that Senno Rikyu, the tea master, had a tea house built there just because of the water. Nowadays is the Yamazaki distillery that benefits from this water, which is the secret to the life of whiskey, forming drop by drop until it forms the stream that irrigates all the trees around. After hundreds of years, a river is formed from this and feeds life abundantly wherever it goes. For this reason, each glass of whiskey carries with it a story that surpasses what our eyes can see, so there's something poetic about serving the customer a drink that transcends the mere flavor of a cocktail, rather than just a simple glass of whiskey. At this moment, Meiwa approaches after setting aside some of the water from Nadamiya for her grandfather. Then Sasakura takes advantage of the stroll to gift Kevin with a talisman from Mina's shrine, which aids those seeking to enhance their abilities. Intrigued by this, Kelvin takes his object out of his pocket to see if it's also a talisman, but in reality it's an amulet from Mount Hosho, one of the floats that parade in the Jion festival. The amulet is exclusive to this festival and comes from a tale of true and reciprocal love. After hearing this, Kelvin isolates himself once again to reflect on the story of his amulet, where 12 years ago, he was enchanted by the assembly of the floats at that year's Jion festival. Despite this, his father makes it clear that they didn't come for leisure, and as they inherit his fortune, the boy must contain his excitement and maintain seriousness. During this trip, Kelvin visited the Takiya residence, and a young woman welcomed the visitors with a slightly broken English, but Kelvin says it's okay to speak in Japanese. Relieved, the young woman invites the visitors into the inn, and even without having taken off their shoes yet, Kelvin's father corrects his posture at every moment and says they will leave as soon as they unpack. At dinner time, the girl places the chopsticks for Kelvin turned towards his left hand, and the boy's father comments on the girl's intelligence for noticing that his son is left-handed, which the girl discovered when she saw him taking off his shoes earlier. Then the hostess introduces the girl as Chitos, her daughter and successor in the inn. And as for the foreigner, he also introduces his son and says he intends to leave him in charge of his hotel in Singapore, while the boy feels embarrassed by Chitos's welcoming smile. When they leave for business the next day, Kelvin notices the girl going to school, and since then, on his father's endless business meetings, he nurtured a feeling for the lovely girl from the Takiya Inn. And every passing day increased his desire to be near her and know her life, like one day when he saw her dancing with her friends in a nearby park. One day, Chitos had an argument with her mother about her freedom to follow her own path, and it was Kelvin she chose to confide her problems to about how her mother suffocates her and tries to control her steps above all. In the middle of the conversation, Kelvin asks if the girl has ever thought about being a dancer because he saw her rehearsing. Chitos is embarrassed by this but confesses that she has this dream, although she is sure she won't be able to fulfill it because she is an only child and her mother needs her to take over the inn. Kelvin questions if she intends to follow these boring rules of her mother forever because he himself, just like his father tries to decide his destiny, decided to follow the path he chooses as soon as he can. In this way, Chitos proposes a challenge. If his popsicle stick is the winning one, Kelvin will have to cancel all plans for the next day. If hers is the winning one, she won't do any tasks in the inn. And if both sticks are winners, they will see the Jian festival together. That said, when they finish the popsicle and show their sticks, both had the prize marks, so Chito's questions if they are really going to do this. Finally, Kelvin confirms that it's going to happen, so they both rejoice together for what's to come. However, 12 years later, Kelvin tells Miwa that he didn't go to the festival because he couldn't challenge his father. Since then, he wonders if Chitos managed to go but was alone, or if she couldn't even leave the inn. In Miwa's opinion, the girl was afraid to say she went and hurt the boy's feelings, so she communicated her feelings through this amulet. And the worst part is that Kelvin doesn't know where Chitos is anymore because the family inn was closed, so he will never be able to apologize for everything. After all, he didn't fulfill his promise and hurt the girl, and that's why he feels like a terrible person. At this moment, Sasakura serves his friend a Yamazaki 12 years old, and along with it, a drop of water. When Kelvin drinks, he is transported to the origins of the cocktail from the wheat plantation, through the stream to the conservation barrels. Thus, he discovers that adding a little water opens up a range of flavors to the drink. According to Sasakura, the taste that Kelvin found unpleasant from the low wine aged for 12 years and gained the flavor it has today. Similarly, Kelvin spent 12 years retaining this feeling and maturing within himself like a low wine. And with the inevitable dose of time along with honest self-reflection, this is the technique that can transform a crude substance into something mature, like an overcome feeling, transitioning from youth to adulthood. Hearing this, Kelvin apologizes to Chitos, wherever she may be. Later that night, Mawa uses her grandfather's influence to get emergency spots to use a bar, but when trying to call Yuri and Kyoko, the two were having fun elsewhere and didn't hear the phone ring. Finally, at the farewell moment, Kelvin thanks Sasakura for yesterday's teachings because that's how he managed to understand the kind of work a bartender can offer. As he leaves, he calls someone and informs them that he's on his way to the bar. Meanwhile, the two intoxicated ones are already in another atmosphere, and the waiter asks if they are going to spend the night in the bar because the last train has already departed. The next day, Kamishima was furious with Yukari because she forgot to send some paperwork to the finance department, risking the approval of reimbursements from Hotel Cardinal. Maiwa remarks that her friend doesn't usually make mistakes like this, so she asks if something happened. Then she invites Miwa to Ogura's bar and announces that she's getting married. Ogura is glad the girl found someone as crazy as her to put up with each other, and the one agrees despite the bar owner thinking she would get mad at the comment. Because of this special moment, Yukari wants to celebrate with her friends, and Ogura promises to treat the bride as if she were a queen and even give a 20% discount, much to everyone's delight. Later, in a company's board meeting, a mistake in the customs declaration delayed the delivery deadline of something important. Some colleagues believe Hayes made this slip because the industrial machinery department has been performing exceptionally well, and it got to the manager's head. In the director's opinion, the man should have blamed his subordinate, but he refused to do so. Despite everything, everyone present knows that's why the employees like working with him, but they surely would have thrown any of the collaborators under the bus to save their own skin. By the way, the girl who caused all this trouble apologizes to her manager, but he doesn't show much empathy due to what happened in the meeting, leaving the girl even sadder. When he can't find his pack of cigarettes in his jacket, he realizes this was the worst moment to choose to quit smoking, even though he's still on his third day without cigarettes. As night falls, Hayes is walking sadly through the streets, still shaken by what happened earlier in the day, so he accidentally stumbles upon Eden Hall and decides to go in to unwind. Sasakura welcomes the man politely and asks what he'd like. As he sits down, he orders a light drink called bamboo. A woman sitting next to him comments that she didn't know about this drink and asks if it's served in bamboo cups. Sasakura replies that no, although the cocktail is indeed Japanese. Meanwhile, Hayase asks the woman to put out her cigar since she wasn't smoking it, because bamboo is a drink with a very delicate aroma. Therefore, Sasakura invites the man to sit a bit farther away to avoid the smoke, but Hayase refuses to move and demands the customer to put out the cigar even though smoking is allowed in Eden Hall. However, the girl responds that the smoke from this cigar is as important to her as the cocktail is to the man, yet Hayase continues to insist she put it out, saying bars aren't for selfish people like her. Keeping her calm, she says that not everything in life is as we want it, so the man takes the cigar from the girl's hand and breaks it in half. After that, he puts a note on the counter to pay the bill and leaves without a word, leaving the woman astonished. The next day, Hayase reflects on his actions at the bar last night, so he returns to Eden Hall to apologize to the establishment's owner for the scene he caused. He confesses that he recently quit smoking and so the cigar smoke was bothering him in a way he hadn't imagined. Therefore, Sasakura forgives the customer without a second thought and invites him behind the counter for a moment. Joining the bartender, Hayase looks around and likes the view the young man has for working, while Sasakura explains that it's a taboo among bartenders to share customers' private information, so he wants the man to pretend he's just thinking aloud. Then the bartender shows a cigar seal and explains that in the West, when a child is born, it's tradition to distribute cigars to celebrate. Speaking of which, a child was born recently, and the doctor who delivered it received a box full of cigars. However, the child was born with a serious illness, and the doctor decided to smoke the cigars only when the baby recovered. In the 6 months after the birth, the doctor worked day and night to save the baby. Interrupting the story, Hayase asks if that doctor is the woman from yesterday, so Sasakura continues, saying that she couldn't save the child, and that's why she lit the cigar yesterday without taking a single puff, because she was keeping her promise. Finally, Sasakura reveals that behind the counter is a mysterious place because from his point of view, he can see the customer's real emotions reflected in each face. For example, one day 2 colleagues were talking happily but secretly hated each other. Another day, a couple argued, desperate to mend their relationship. Hearing this, Hayase feels bad for what he did to the doctor and asks if she often comes to this bar. Sasakura replies that she has been coming late at night regularly, so Hayase takes the cigar seal and leaves. At Hotel Cardinal, Yukari is like a child celebrating the fact that Maiwo will take her wherever she wants and pay for everything. The bride wonders if she should go to an Italian or French restaurant until they end up at Eden Hall, as usual. Upon hearing the news, Sasakura promises to prepare a great drink for the occasion. Yukari is excited to receive the divine goblet, while the bartender thinks that something champagne-based would be too obvious, so he mixes 1/3 brandy, 1/3 cream de cacao liqueur, and 1/3 fresh cream with a touch of nutmeg at the end. After that, Sasakura presents the Alexander drink to the woman. Then he explains that this cocktail was created in 1863 to be served at the wedding ceremony of Edward VII of the United Kingdom and Princess Alexandra. Yukari falls in love with the drink's sweet taste, while the bartender congratulates the customer on her wedding after another job well done. At the end of the night, Hayase appears again and orders the usual bamboo while keeping an eye on the bar door. The bartender asks if the man is waiting for someone, and he replies not exactly. Since earlier, Hayase had been counting the hours on the clock for this moment of the day to arrive, but there was still no sign of the doctor showing up again. The next day, the manager waited until 10 at night to return to Eden Hall, but the doctor still hadn't appeared. Already without hope of personally giving the girl a gift, Hayase asks Sasakura to deliver a box of cigars to her, because his behavior that day really bothered the man a lot. Sasakura comments that the woman was also quite bothered by that and even said that Hayase's behavior was quite childish. Then looking at the gift, he emphasizes that this brand of cigars, Romeo and Juliet, is too famous even for Cuban standards, and that Winston Churchill himself smokes cigars from this brand. Hayase smiles and likes the romantic name of the brand, while the doctor finally sets foot in Eden Hall again. She greets the man somewhat awkwardly, and he greets back in the same manner after what happened between the two. Before sitting down, she notices the box on the counter and asks since when bartenders work as matchmakers, because this seems like a classic case of please, waiter, deliver this gift to that woman. Hayase replies that he would never do that, so the girl jokes asking him not to get nervous like that day. With that said, the man hands over the box and apologizes for his behavior on that occasion. The girl apologizes back and asks if these cigars are too expensive, and Sasakura replies that this box should cover about 10 nights at the bar. The doctor refuses to accept such an expensive gift, so the owner of the establishment suggests that he keep the box there just for the two of them when they come. Hayase quit smoking, and the doctor said at work that she doesn't smoke, but they are determined to make an exception for this case. Sasakura promises to keep the secret and tells that in the past, love letters were exchanged through cigar boxes, and in the Russian Revolution, they were exchanged for confidential documents. Soon the woman opens the box and smells the nice aroma coming from the 10 cigars inside. Then Sasakura asks the two to join him there in the corner so as not to disturb the non-smoking customers, and finally, the doctor introduces herself to Hayase as Rumi Kimishima. She apologizes for the way she acted the other day, but he puts all the responsibility on himself for taking out his frustrations on the girl. However, Rumi confesses that she was depressed, and that's why she made a big deal out of nothing. In fact, that's why she was so bitter that day, unlike today. In the end, the two were already having fun and laughing together. Earlier that day, Meiwa asked Yukari not to forget to mark her appointments on the calendar since she must be swamped with things to do because of the wedding. In a strange way, the bride replied to her friend not to worry, but Miwa suspected this different behavior from the woman. At break time, Yukari had a snack in the square until she received a message from her aunt congratulating her on the wedding. When night fell, she decided to stop by Eden Hall, where Hayase and Rumi were at that moment. So she asks for another one of those Alexanders that Sasakura made, as it was the drink that celebrated the marriage between Eduardo VII and Princess Alexandra. Taking the opportunity, Sasakura remembers that in the movie Cursed Vice, the protagonist pressures his wife, who doesn't drink, to have an Alexander. Because of that one drink, the wife became an alcoholic and their lives fell apart since then. With that said, the bartender adds that this cocktail is sweet and pleasant, but at the same time, very strong. According to Yukari, Alexander is sweet and strong, just like her wedding dreams, and perhaps the moral of the story is not to dive headfirst into it. Sasakura says that the sweet and the bitter, like comedy and tragedy, represent the two sides that everything in life has. By the way, Yukari opens up and confesses that she's torn because a very dear aunt is sick and doesn't have much time left. Her dream was to see Yukari dressed as a bride, so the woman decided to get married before the aunt passed away. Therefore, it's a terrible reason to get married, which makes the girl burst into tears. Hearing this, Sasakura says that bar lighting is low to hide the tears of the customers. Yukari says that Sasakura always knows what to say, and then she cries even more intensely. The next day, Kamishima asks the bride to decide the guests soon, as it's so much work and can affect the service, but she warns that she canceled the ceremony. The manager and Miwa are surprised while she explains that she doesn't feel ready to get married yet. Miwa understands just fine, while Kamishima is sad that he can no longer give a speech. With that said, Yukari found it impressive that Sasakura already predicted that this would happen, and that's why he prepared an Alexander for her that day. Later, Miwa goes to Eden Hall to talk to the bartender about this case. She thinks she should have asked what was going on with Yukari more directly. After all, she had suspected that something there wasn't right since Yukari announced the wedding. Sasakura says he also suspected something because, as the saying goes, if someone realizes they've fallen asleep, it's because they're already half awake. That's why he thinks everyone deep down knows what's best for them. Meanwhile, Rumi and Hayase had already smoked 8 cigars, and after these last 2, the cycle between the two will close. Rumi thanks for the time with the man who feels he shared a beautiful dream with the doctor. Then he asks for the bill, and Rumi tells that from next week on, she will spend 2 years working at a hospital in Senbei, so Hayase invites the woman to dinner, trying to make the most of the last days with her. Embarrassed, Rumi accepts the invitation, while Sasakura watches the scene with satisfaction on his face. Hey folks, if you're digging this anime and want to see more, drop a like down below and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We need your support to hit 90,000 subscribers. Every subscription counts and helps us grow our community. Catch you in the next one.